Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Olivia and today I'm going to be teaching you how to make this Sabrina dress and turn it into a strapless maxi silhouette instead. Using a viscose linen blend for the bottom, and then for the top I'm using this summer Ponte fabric. Ponte is essentially like a double knit. As you can see, it's very stretchy. It has nice four-way stretch. This is the one currently available at Joann's. I have made it in white and black. They have it in this red, and I think I'm gonna go back and also make it in navy. So I'm obsessed with this dress and this pattern, and I think you will be too. It's pretty straightforward. If anything, this tutorial to make it into a strapless might be easier because you don't have to do armholes at all, which is great. So yeah, let's just get right into it. The first thing that I'm going to show you how to do is how to manipulate the top of the bodice pattern of the Sabrina dress pattern and how to adjust that to fit you to make it strapless. So for that, you will need the Sabrina dress pattern, which I will have linked in the description below. It's also available on my website, oliviasews.co. You're also going to need your sewing machine and your serger. If you don't have a serger, that's okay. You can just use a zigzag stitch over the areas or the instructions when I say to serge. Just make sure that you're finishing your raw edges. I am also going to be doing a little bit of hand stitching, so you will need a single needle and thread. That's essentially to help the facing stay down on your top so that it's not like flipping up. To adjust my pattern, I am going to be using my pattern paper. I'm going to be tracing the Sabrina pattern onto this pattern paper. What I like about pattern paper is that it is marked with these grids, so that way you know perfect 1-inch block squares. It really helps when you're trying to line everything up and make sure it's even. If you don't have pattern paper, that's okay. You can also use like any sort of construction paper that you have, literally anything. You also want some sort of curved ruler. So I'm using my Veriform curve ruler. I love this. I use it all the time. It is not that expensive, and I find myself picking it up quite regularly when I'm sewing. So if you're building your sewing area or your sewing kit, I highly recommend getting a curved ruler. You're also going to want just a regular long straight ruler. This is the one that I use. Going back to the curved ruler, if you do not have a curved ruler and you want to just jump right in and make this tutorial, you also don't have to buy an actual ruler. These rulers are available for print. You can easily find them on Google. If you just search printable curved ruler, you can find them and you can print them out and cut them, and then you can just use that to trace. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. To start, we are going to trace our front bodice piece of the Sabrina dress onto our pattern paper. I'm just using a book to weigh it down, and I'm using my rotary tool to mark it. Of course, if you don't have a rotary tool, that's okay. You can just use a pen or a marker. I just like to do this first to try to be as accurate as possible. When you do this, you only need to trace up until a little bit above the armhole. I'd say like right here, maybe an inch or two. Now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and find the midpoint of our pattern. Now we're going to connect the two armpit points. So essentially this is where the side seam meets with the armhole. We're going to connect these 2 points on each side. Just do that by drawing a straight line across. Perfect. And now we want to take our rulers, and what we'll do is we are going to move the armpit point in by 1 inch and down by 1/2 inch. There's my first point, moving it in by 1 inch. And then I'm moving it down by 1/2 inch. So this right here is my new armpit point. I'm gonna do the same exact thing on the other side. In by 1 inch, down by 1/2 inch. Now we can connect these 2 points with a straight line. This is where the curved roller really comes in handy, because the next step is going to be blending this new armpit point into the waist seam here. So essentially what I'm going to do is I will just follow the natural curve that the side seam already creates, and I'm going to close it off and just try to attach it right around the waist here. We're gonna lose a lot on this side here, and that's totally okay. We want this top part to be a little bit tighter because we aren't going to be getting any support really from the arms. That will be my main point. Same exact thing on this side. And you can just play around with this if you prefer until it looks a little bit natural. Like for example, that did not look very natural, so I'm just going to redo this again. It also doesn't help that when I was tracing it, this didn't come out very natural. I really should be trying to blend it into there. Still isn't giving me exactly what I want. You can kind of see it just, this is a little bit too lumpy. So we just want to kind of try to blend one more time. I think the bigger issue is probably that this was not blended very well. I'm going to clean this up. So now that is going to be the new line that I follow for my top piece. Now for the back, I'm going to repeat the exact same steps to get the pattern traced onto the pattern paper. For the back piece, instead of doing an inch, I am going to take it in 1/2 inch at the top. And then at this midpoint that we drew, I'm going to mark 1.5 inches from the top. Now I want to blend my side into this new point that I drew. We'll repeat that on both sides. And now I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to connect the armpit point to this midpoint. So essentially what we did is we're dropping the lower part of the back here. Once you're done, you can just go ahead and cut out your new back piece. Now that we have reworked the Sabrina bodice front and back piece, it is time to actually cut it out. Now when you cut it out, you should be cutting one of the back panel and one of the front panel. I would also recommend that when you do this, as you're cutting, you're going to cut out your pattern pieces. Like say this is laying and the fabric is behind here. You're going to slice the fabric to match the pattern piece, right? But then right above that, you're going to want to trace that and slice again about 1.5 inches. But this is just going to ensure that it follows the same curvature as the top of both your front and back panel pieces. Now again, I'm making sure that when I do this, I'm leaving space on the top of each panel piece. Now this pattern already accounts for seam allowance, so we are going to go ahead and we will cut right up against the pattern piece. and that is going to be your strip. Now let's do the exact same thing on the other side. Okay, now it's time to make the skirt. I'm going to unfold all of this so that I can see the full length. I got 2 yards, which is 72 inches from point to point. So all the way across here is 72 inches. Now the width of the roll of fabric that I got is 53 inches. So from here all the way down to here is 53 inches. Essentially what I'm going to do is I am going to fold my fabric in half, hamburger style is I guess the best way to do it, because this is the shorter end. And by doing that, my salvaged edges are going to be on the sides, and I'm going to have 2 layers of fabric. Before I move anything, I do want to make sure that I cut out my pocket pieces. So what I'm going to do is just make sure that this is all laying flat. I'm going to put down my 2 pattern pieces as close to the salvaged edge as I can, and I'm going to cut out 2 at a time pocket pieces. I need 4 total. Now if you need this pocket piece pattern, this is also available on my website, oliviasews.co. This is just for free, you don't have to purchase it. So now that all of our pattern pieces are cut out, it's time to take it to the serger to prepare them. So we are going to be serging both of the sides of both our front and back panel. We're going to be serging technically the bottom part of our facing pieces. So this is, for example, you can see where I cut it across. I am going to be serging right along this line here, because when I flip it over to attach it, I want it to attach there. And I want this to be the serged edge. So I'm going to be serging the bottom of our facing, which should be opposite of the line that separated the facing from the top. And I'm also going to be serging the sides of those. I'm going to do the same exact thing on the back. And then when it comes to the pockets, I am going to serge all around the edge of each pocket. You should have 4 of those. So now it's time to make the ruffle skirt pieces. So essentially you should have 2 long skirt pieces, and what you're going to do is you will do 2 rows of basting stitches all along the edge here. You want to do this long ways, so on the longest piece of fabric, and to do a basting stitch you are going to set your machine to the highest width and the highest length, and you should be doing a straight stitch. When you do this, the 2 stitch rows should be no more than 1/4 of an inch apart, and make sure that when you start and when you end, you have super long thread tails. That way you can pull the ruffle pieces, pull the fabric on the thread to create the ruffle. You can do this right along the edge here. I like to line up the edge of my fabric with my presser foot. Just double checking to make sure I have long thread tails to pull. And now we can start stitching. And make sure that when you pull this out, you have long thread tails. And now you should have a row of stitches, kind of like this. Now what you want to do is do the exact same thing 1/4 of an inch to the left of that. Because we have the sewing machine out, I'm just going to go ahead and set the skirt pieces to the side momentarily. And now I'm going to assemble my bodice pieces. So essentially what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to place the pieces of fabric right sides together. Mine is the same on both sides, so it doesn't really matter for me, but if you have different sides of your fabric, just make sure that you do it right sides together. I'm starting by pinning at the armpit holes, and then I will work my way down. Okay, and when I'm doing this, I am using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure that you change your machine settings back just to a regular stitch so that you're not base stitching. Now I am going to take my 2 facing pieces and I will attach them at the side seams. Now I am going to attach my facings to the top. I want to make sure that my top is turned inside out so that the right side of the fabric is facing me and the wrong side of the fabric of the facing is facing me. So essentially you are attaching these right sides together. First thing that you want to do is match up the side seams. Make sure that your seam allowance of both your shirt and your facing are flat down, that they're not rolled or anything weird like that. And you're just going to pin it, and then you're going to go over to the other side and do the exact same thing. And make sure that when you do this, your facing doesn't accidentally get twisted. Now you can pin all along the top here, just a couple, just to make sure that it all stays even and aligned. Now that everything is pinned and in place, you're going to go all along the raw edge here and attach the facing to the shirt. I'm just lining up the edge with my presser foot here, and that is going to be my seam allowance. Now that we have attached the facing to the top of the bodice piece, we are going to do a top stitch to secure the seam allowance to the facing. So essentially what you're going to do is you're just going to go over the top here, making sure that this seam allowance that you just created is connected here, and you're going to stitch right along the line. What you're going to do is you will fold your seam allowance and your facing together, and you're going to do a stitch right along the line here. And now, just to secure this and make sure it doesn't flip up, essentially what you're going to do is you will fold down your facing, and you are going to do a stitch on the outside of your bodice piece to ensure that the facing stays facing down. And just do a couple of straight stitches and back stitches. To ensure that everything stays in place, we are going to be doing a little bit of hand stitching on both the front and the back piece. So essentially what we're going to be doing is we will be attaching the facing to the bodice. When we attach it to the bodice, we are going to start by going into the facing, but then when we go into the bodice, we do not want to puncture the right side of the fabric. And by the way, the wrong side, I have my top turned inside out so that all the wrong sides of the fabric are facing me. So essentially when I do this, I just barely want to be catching this side of my fabric, and I don't want it to poke through on the other side at all. So I'm just going to make sure that everything is laying flat. I'm grabbing it in the middle. I am putting my needle through my facing piece, and then I will just very gently grab a single thread off of my bodice piece, and I will attach it together. And I'm going to flip it over every time I do this just to make sure that you can't see it on the other side. That's good to go, so I'm going to go ahead and just repeat that right here in the same spot a couple of times. Right, and now I am going to just tie it off. Now we'll do the exact same thing on the other side. Great, and now our bodice piece is pretty much done. We can go ahead and set this to the side because now we want to attach, or now we want to prep our skirt to attach to the bodice piece. Essentially, to make the skirt ruffle, we already have sewn 2 stitches of lines that are basting stitches. What we want to do is separate the front and the back thread tails on either side of the fabric. Once we do that, we can basically take the thread tails on the back and we can start to gently pull the fabric along the thread tails. When we do this, it will create a ruffle, and you want to be very, very careful that you don't accidentally break the threads here, so just be super careful as you're doing it and go all the way down the length of the fabric. I like to do this until about the halfway point, and then I will switch it and I will do it on the other side. Okay, and when you're done, you should have something like this. I'm just going to go ahead and repeat it on the other skirt piece. Now it is time to attach our pocket pieces to our skirt. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take one of our skirt panels and we will take 2 of our pocket pieces. Now to make sure that everything is lined up evenly, I am going to mark from the top of my skirt down to where I want the top of my pocket to be. So for me, I know I want that to be about 4 inches, so I will line that up. I'll find the 4. And then I will mark it. I'm going to do the same exact thing on the other side. That way everything is lining up evenly. There's no mistakes of where it could be lined up. Once I've done that, I'm going to take my one single pocket piece. I'm going to make sure that the bulk of it is facing down and inwards towards the bulk of the skirt. I'm going to line up the top of the pocket piece with that line that I just created. And I'm also going to align the straight edge of the pocket with my side seam. And then once I do that, I'm just going to use pins to pin it in place. I'll repeat the exact same steps on the other side. And then once I'm done, I'm going to repeat the exact same steps with the other pocket pieces on the other skirt piece. Now that you have your pocket attached, what you're going to do is you will flip it over and you will do a top stitch to attach the seam allowance to the pocket. So you are essentially just going to do a straight stitch all along the seam there. You're going to repeat that on each one of the pockets. Now it is time to attach the skirt pieces to each other. So what you're going to do is you will place one of your skirt pieces with the right side up. And then you are going to take your other skirt piece and you will place that with the right side of this other skirt piece facing this skirt piece here. What you're going to do is you will pin and you are going to do a straight stitch to attach both the front and the back piece together. So how I'll do that is I will start in the corner here and I will match up the edges of the pocket. I will go all around the pocket to here, and then I will go all the way down the length of the skirt. So I'm only doing this on one side here and one side here. Make sure that when you do stitch this, you're not stitching your pocket closed. You need to be going from the corner all the way around the pocket and back down. You want that pocket to be open. Just to make sure that I have everything lined up as well, I will always start by pinning the pockets, the points or the edges of the pockets together first. Make sure that when you start to do these stitches that you're not accidentally stitching over where we will be pulling the thread tails to make this ruffled, because we do still need to pull the skirt out to adjust it to the waist of our bodice piece. So essentially I'm going to start doing straight stitches right underneath those two thread tails that we created. When it comes to the pocket, you're going to have to shift your machine or the skirt under the machine quite a few times. What I like to do when I do that is I like to lower my needle into the fabric, and then I can lift my presser foot and twist my fabric as needed, making sure that the stitch will always stay in that place. So you're gonna have to do that quite a few times as you go around here, just because it is a super curved edge. I decided that when it comes to my pockets, I actually want to give myself just a little bit more space. So rather than sewing with the 1/4 inch seam allowance like you see here, so rather than sewing with the 1/2 inch seam allowance like you see here, I'm just going to go right along the edge of my serge stitches. This is just going to give me more space in the pocket. Once I get back to the rest of my skirt piece, I can then use my 1/2 inch seam allowance. Lovely. Now everything is all closed up on the skirt. We are going to finally figure out this situation and attach the skirt to our bodice piece. So what I'm going to do is I will make sure I will take my bodice piece and I am going to place it inside of my skirt piece. When I do this, I want to make sure that the right side of my bodice is facing the right side of my skirt piece. I'm then going to match up the side seams of my bodice piece with the side seams of my skirt piece. Now remember that the top of your skirt piece isn't going to be attached because we didn't sew the straight stitches there because we wanted to make sure that we still had access to the thread tails. That's totally okay. So essentially what we'll do is we're going to take this piece and we'll fold down the seam allowance and we'll attach it to this side of the bodice piece, so matching it up with the seam allowance on that side. Pin it in place. Do the exact same thing on this side here. So now your side seams are matched up. You're going to do the same exact thing on the other side. split my bodice side seam open, take this, fold it to create what would be the seam allowance, and pin it in place. Do the same thing with this one. Now, essentially, what we want to do is we want to stretch out our skirt pieces, so kind of loosen some of these ruffles here so that it matches the length of our bodice piece. So how I like to do that is I'll start in the middle and I'll just gently start pulling outward. Try to make sure that when you do this, your ruffles are still evenly distributed. You don't want it to be lopsided and super ruffled on one side and not the other. This is going to take a minute. It's a little bit of a trust the process kind of thing. Just go super slow. Try not to break your threads. And just keep adjusting. Now, as you can see here, I've basically stretched out my ruffles on this side so that they match the length of my bodice piece here. So now that I'm happy with this, I am essentially just going to start pinning it in place. I want to match up the the bottom edge of my bodice piece with the top edge of my skirt piece. I'm just going to use pins to keep it all in place. Perfect. Now it is all pinned in place and the skirt ruffle on this side matches the length of my bodice piece. So I'm just going to repeat the same exact steps on the other side. Once you're happy with how the ruffles are distributed and everything is lined up, what you're going to do is you will take it to your sewing machine and you're going to do a base stitch. When you do the base stitch, you want to attach your bodice piece and your skirt underneath the stitches here that you created your ruffles with. So essentially when you do this, it's still going to ruffle because this much fabric is on it. That fabric isn't going anywhere, but you just want to make sure that you're not seeing your thread tail stitches. When you do this, you're going to have a lot of fabric on the skirt piece that you're trying to work with here. Just try to lay it as flat as possible as it goes under the presser foot. You don't want it to be twisted over here, because then your ruffles are going to be a little bit twisted. So just go slow and try to, like I said, lay it as flat as possible. Now that I've gone around and I've base stitched the bodice of the dress to the skirt, I went ahead and I'm just trying it on to make sure that overall I'm happy with the fit. The pockets are amazing and it's looking really good, so I'm happy with this. Now, instead of doing the base stitch or where I just did the base stitch, I'm going to go over it with my serger and my knife engaged to get rid of all this excess messy thread and just clean it up and make it have a super nice finish. Now it is time to hem the bottom of the dress. So essentially when we do this, we are going to turn the dress inside out and we will be folding a 1/2 inch down and then we will fold it another 1/2 inch down. And you want to make sure that you are doing this inwards towards the inside of the dress. So when I'm doing this, I am just using my 1/2 inch seam allowance, so that way I'm just sewing right along the top folded edge here. One last thing that I am going to do just to make sure that it has a super nice finish is I am going to stitch the top of the pocket here together just a bit, and I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. So if you can see right now, it's kind of open, and we just want to stitch about maybe an inch upwards together, but we want to make sure that we're not getting the skirt piece at all. We'll only be sewing the pockets together. So how I'm going to do that is I will make sure my pocket piece is sticking out of my skirt. So before we stitched all the way around, which means that this entire thing is open. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a straight stitch here just to close it by about an inch. And then I'll do the same thing right here. And when I do that, I'm just going to go on the outside of where my original stitches for the pocket were and make sure that I'm not catching any of the inside of the pocket. And when you're done, you should have something that looks like this. Thank you so much for making this pattern and for watching the video. And don't forget to subscribe. Happy sewing!